This is Defiant's Daily Dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor. And if today did not radicalize you to worry about the state of our democracy and the stability of the world, then prepare to be radicalized, because a lot has happened in Washington today that has rippled across the world. The President of the United States at 7:06 this morning posted something on social media. I'm going to read it in full. He posted, as you can see there, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. This post was met with widespread global panic. I don't think that's an overstatement. The President of the United States of America openly threatened genocide against a people. A civilization, he wrote, will die tonight. No such threat has ever been made from an American president, ever. Not like this, not in this manner. It has led to the most widespread calls in American history for the invocation of the 25th Amendment, from members of Congress who have said the president needs to be ousted, members of the MAGA movement, people who got Donald Trump elected, have spent the day saying that he is demented, that he is unstable, he should be removed from office. And reporting indicates that America's allies are terrified about what the president may or may not be thinking. Amidst all of this, I will say to you very candidly, I find it alarming that there is continued reporting out of the White House that the president is keeping the option of using nuclear weapons against Iran on the table. This is a very serious moment. In fact, this moment is the most serious moment of the first or second Trump administration. At any point that Donald Trump has been in office, very credible people, very sober-minded people of both political persuasions or of no political persuasion have shared their genuine fear that the president may be the United States into something it is wholly unprepared for. That's where we start our show today. And rather than run through the story, I want to bring in two guests who can shine a light on what is happening right now, potentially inside the US government, how we, the American people, should be thinking about it, and how the world might react. We welcome onto the program the incredible Sue Gordon, former Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence in the first Trump administration, a lifelong spy. Sue, wonderful to have you on the program today.
Great to be here, Miles. Weird day. Impossible.
It is indeed. And we also have with us retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, who was commander of U.S. Army Forces Europe from 2011 to 2012. He also commanded the 1st Armored Division in Germany and Multinational Division North during the surge in Iraq from 2007 to 2009. General, it's great to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Miles. Thanks for having both of us.
Yeah, General, I want to start with you because you said something today that's gotten a lot of traction, which is that you suspect, at least, or perhaps you've received some confirmation from folks that members of the military have been put into a position where they might be needing to defy unlawful orders. That wouldn't surprise anyone. If the president of the United States is talking about destroying an entire civilization, whether he meant it or not, there's clearly some sort of direction down the chain of command to give the president the ability to go wipe people out. That's genocidal by its very nature. What are you hearing, or what do you suspect is happening right now inside the Pentagon?
Yeah, a little bit of both, Miles. What I'll tell you is whenever you're looking at targeting options, and I've done this in combat, where you say, okay, what are we trying to hit? What's the reason for it? How are we going to strike it? What are the implications of it? And usually somewhere at that table in the strike package meeting is a lawyer. And they will tell you, hey, look, on that particular target, there's a potential for it being illegal because it strikes civilians, or it has great harm to the local society. It isn't a pure military target. There's going to be huge collateral damage, and innocents will die. So those are the kind of things that you massage into a kinetic strike package. When a military organization puts those packages together, they work pretty draconianly succinct in terms of what they're going to hit, why they're going to hit it, what they have to use to hit it, and what are the implications. Okay, so that's the long explanation. Now you get into well, what if someone tells you to hit something as a military commander that violates some of those legalities, like taking out electrical plants or hitting a water desalination plant, which is going to affect more civilians and has very limited military use. Well, you're going to push back on that as a military commander, and you're going to say, well, we don't want to really hit that target. We may want to hit these targets because they have more military applications, but let's stay away from the civilian ones. Well, that's hard to parse when you have a commander in chief potentially giving the order to completely obliterate all of Iran and turn it into dust and take it back to the Stone Age, because you're not really assessing what the targets are in that situation. You're just going for pillage and plunder and destruction. And I would hope, because this is how I've been trained, that military commanders say, yeah, we're not going to do that. And you do it in a very more nuanced way than I just said, but you have to put it in the perspective of, this is not a correct target. I could go to jail for this. I could be held before the Hague or any international body for committing a war crime. So I'm not going to tell my soldiers or my airmen, whatever you happen to have, to do anything like this, because as a commander, you not only have that requirement to disobey an unlawful order or push back on it, you also have the requirement to protect your subordinates, the enlisted people, the ones that were actually pull the trigger and launch the missile, from doing something like that, because they depend on you to be that moral guidepost. That's a long explanation. I'm sorry.
No, that's very helpful, General. I also want to bring into the conversation my guest co-host today, the incredible Maritza Georgiou, who co-hosts the Grounded podcast with Senator Tester. Maritza, of course, an award-winning journalist who's been following this situation closely as well. Maritza, I'm gonna toss you the microphone.
Oh, thanks, Miles. I mean, it's so good to have you both here to have this conversation. And what I'm hearing from people who aren't as knowledgeable about military actions as you both are is, what should we be doing? What should we be doing? I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I just saw a post in my little local resistance group in Missoula, Montana, that said, I'm going to go to this bridge with my banner and I don't know what else to do. So what are you two watching as far as how it's going to affect us here at home and what we should all be doing right now?
Sue, let's go to you first on that.
Yeah, so this is going to feel unsatisfying, but it's something I've done. You need to call Congress. You just need to pick up the phone and dial. One of the things it's hard to say, but the president's only power is that which we give him. Every word he says is on behalf of us. If we allow this without resistance, then we have not done everything in our power to do it. And I think you should speak out, talk to your friends. But I think that's the first thing. And I have to say this, the irresponsibility of the president's words and actions here are so breathtaking to me. The world is never going to go back from this point, even if we somehow don't do the military action that would try and achieve the insane goal that was articulated in that tweet. It is so important that nations like the United States, especially those that are so powerful, are reliable. Whether you agree with us or disagree, whether you're an ally or whether you're an adversary, reliability is the most important element of any craft, and we are no longer reliable. That means that any ability to walk back, to get agreement, to set a future course that is something you can depend on, has been taken away from us. So make no mistake, I hope that this is a Taco Tuesday. I pray that it is, so that we get another day to try and have someone step into the fray to make sense of it. But even if that happens, the next thing that has to happen is we have to build new. We have to put the right people in office. We have to start building the new relationships back. Listen, you cannot surge trust in a crisis, and we have lost national trust.
General, I want to ask you, you've been a part of a lot of actual wars and war games before, including surely this precise type of circumstance. And we are seeing reporting first from PBS that Iran has threatened that it will retaliate by disrupting regional energy supplies. We saw headlines today that the FBI and CISA are warning that potential cyber attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure could be underway, or at least the precursors to such attacks. And then you layer on to this, after Donald Trump's threats this morning, the Wall Street Journal says that Iran has cut off direct communications with the U.S., both formal and informal, over the threats. What do you say to folks that are allies of the president who say, well, he's just, he's escalating to de-escalate? Has he gone past that?
No, I don't think, first of all, that was the case. He wasn't escalating to de-escalate. He was spreading the escalation is what he was doing. And he was using one element of national power to do it, the military. That's the fascinating thing to me, that, when you go to the war colleges, they teach you there's 4 elements of national power. There's the economy, there's information, there's diplomacy, and there's military. Well, if you only use one and you rely on that because it is so solid, and that seems to be what this president is doing, and you forget about the other 3, which it appears he has done. Again, you cited the New York Times article a little while ago. In that Maggie Haberman New York Times article, she said the Secretary of the Treasury and Commerce weren't even in the room when they were discussing the options against a country that controls a significant portion of the global supply chain. To me, that's unfathomable. It just doesn't make any sense. But what you're going to see Iran do, and we have war gamed Iran. I've been in several war games dating back, truthfully, Miles, to 1988, believe it or not, at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, because we wanted to do something other than the full the gap scenario in Germany. We war gamed operations against Iran. And what you find out is they are going to use the other elements of national power, one of which, as you just said, is cyber. I'm surprised they haven't used it yet. I think they probably have in limited instances, but if they really want to do that, they can. Not only because they're very good at it, but it's also because the president and his FBI and his CISA organization have all been depleted in terms of their capability to counter it. But more asymmetrically, Iran is facing our military power with economic power. They are shutting down global supply chains and oil around the world. And how do you fight back against that? You don't bomb more things. You don't close down Karg Island, the major transport point. You don't say we're going to open the straits and demand that they do it, and use a F-bomb to reinforce that demand. It just shows a lack of understanding of how nations work with each other, and how you either attempt to influence, inspire, or intimidate other countries. He's all about the intimidation, and it ain't working.
Picking up on that real quick, Mark. One is, there is no way Iran can agree to what the president says. Zero. They cannot.
Right.
So to escalate to a point, and actually we kind of got into this because even our negotiators tried to get something that they could never give. And if our listeners want to know how that's true, we could never agree to what they want.
Right.
And so that means that's off the table. The other thing is, the other point that Mark made is, when we have degraded our professional cadre, the backbreaking physical labor of national security is not what the president says. It's what you have in the people that are professionals to reach out to theirs across the world, and the relationships that we have with all these countries to make things happen. And that has been denuded.
Right.
And so the likelihood that we're going to have an effective cleanup on aisle 9 is vanishingly small. Sorry, Miles, didn't mean to cut you off, bud.
No, that's super helpful. I mean, Maritza, I'll throw it back to you as well. But the one thing that I want to just put out there for part of the conversation is I just think it's remarkable. Only someone like Donald Trump could make a thuggish, violent, theocratic, repressive regime like the Iranian regime look sympathetic. But he has done that with such shocking, inhuman rhetoric that we're seeing footage out of Iran of Iranians creating human chains on bridges and around power plants, and again looking like the more rational party than the United States. I as an American, as a patriotic American, I find that really, really alarming that our president is looking like the madman here. But sorry, Maritza, back over to you.
If I could add one thing to that, Miles, because I think it's important, that the Truth Social post that the president put out about using the phrase praise be to Allah. I mean, I don't think he understands how offensive that is, because it puts us back in the concept of executing not conflict, but a crusade. And any Arab or Persian that was subject to the Crusades back in the whatever century it was, I'm not a great historian, will tell you that any kind of indicator that you're putting a red cross on your chest and making fun of Allah, yeah, you've just reinforced how dumb you are.
Yeah, I think that was really underreported too, General. I was shocked that he said that. And imagine if on Easter Sunday, any of these countries made a mockery of Christianity. Right. And the outcry that would happen from that. I do kind of want to go back. I mean, there's so many threads to pull on here, including our allies and that they're being threatened right now. But the fact that the president yesterday said that the Iranians are mad when we stop bombing, that they like the bombs near them. Like, that's just insanity to hear. But I do want to ask you, General, about what you're hearing from inside the military. What is morale like right now? I mean, it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, they can't follow these orders. It's illegal to follow unlawful orders, but it's a whole different kind of pressure when you're in it. So what is morale like, and what are you hearing?
It is, and what I'll tell you, Maritza, it's a great question, because what I'm hearing is a bunch of things. I heard a word on Friday from an individual who's in a very large organization. I don't want to give him away, but I asked him what the climate was like in his military organization, and he said it was subdued and scared. And I said, scared? That's interesting. And he said, yeah, it's not a scared as in fear. It's a scare as what shoe is going to drop next, and how are people going to continue to do their jobs when they're judged by who they used to work for, or what kind of tribe they're in within the military, if they're women, or if they're, they happen to have been part of General Milley's command structure at one time. It's just that kind of indicator of how do you perform your work when you have those things hanging over your head. The other thing I'll tell you is, I said this to Nicole Wallace last night, and it struck her that a commander, any commander, has three loyalties. And the first loyalty, obviously, is to the Constitution. When you take that oath and you pledge, to support and defend the Constitution. The second loyalty is to your commander. You want to do the things that your commander asks you to do, because sometimes you just don't know what's driving the actions. So as a military person, you execute when you're told, after you assess what the action is. But the third loyalty is just as important, and that's your loyalty to your subordinates, because an officer can tender their resignation. It might not be accepted, but if they're tendering their resignation, they're suddenly blackballed from everything. But there's a whole bunch of soldiers or airmen or Marines underneath them that don't have that same option. They've signed up for, their tour of duty. So you have a loyalty to protect the soldiers under your command, as well as the Constitution and trying to execute the orders. So you're really torn between a couple of different things.
Yeah. I know we've got to let you both go momentarily. Sue, can I ask you, just big picture before you go, how serious should we see the potential chain reactions here? The fact that Iran's closest allies are two nuclear powers, the Chinese and the Russians, it really seems like the president is playing with the type of fire we've never seen by threatening to wipe out a civilization. But you're the intelligence professional here. How should we be thinking about this moment?
It's as serious as I've seen. If we make the mistake of conducting massive attack on civilian infrastructure in the information environment we have now, where the president said what he intended. If we conduct actions, it will be presumed that they were those actions. And once you let that genie out of the bottle, I think the most profound element of this moment is that we have lost the ability to predict what happens next, because we have lost so much confidence from our allies and partners, which had always been the strength. Nobody really knows what we're going to do. We used to say this about China, that only Xi can decide when something is going to happen. The idea that the United States has now come to a place where one man can say something like this and nobody really knows whether it's a bluff, which power should never do, or whether it's an action. And this information environment where we can't get to the truth, if it follows from what he said, I pray that cooler heads will prevail in all the other nations who remember who we used to be. And in the United States, we figure out that we better become who we are.
Sobering words. I would give anything, including this much cherished leather jacket, for both of you to be back in government right now. Just anything. Sue Gordon, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thank you both for being here today and shedding some light on the current moment.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. Thanks, Marissa. Appreciate it.
Thanks for what you do.
Take care.
And to Sue's point, Miles, I mean, Caroline Leavitt said today, only the president knows where things stand.
Only the president. Exactly a parallel of that, G line in China. I also want to, if before we bring on our next guest, I think we have the clip of those human chains in Iran. This was, to me, Maritza, a really potent moment today, because we're not talking about the horrific Iranian regime surrounding these facilities and whether or not they've coerced civilians to go do this. That's a separate question. But the sight of innocent, unarmed people surrounding power plants, going across bridges, created the type of contrast here that I think so many people around the world are highlighting. A president threatening war crimes and the innocent people who would be hit standing at those places he's targeting. Let's roll that clip if we've got it. Now, the regime is going to make maximum propaganda out of this, but Donald Trump has given them that on a silver platter. We've never had to, on the U.S. side, deal with our president threatening such easily definable war crimes, but now we are. And anyone earlier this week, Maritza, who said, well, the president, when he's talking about bombing civilian power plants and infrastructure, he's speaking in code, or he's speaking hyperbolically, or it's something other than what he means. And then he triples down today at 7 a.m. with this message about wiping out a civilization. You can't have any mistake about what Donald Trump means. Now, you can debate whether or not Donald Trump would actually go forward with it, but at this point, it seems like you cannot debate what he means.
Right. I mean, wiping out an entire civilization is pretty clear, to your point, Miles. And I think you make another great point, which is that, yes, the Iranian regime is going to put out, whatever propaganda they are, but so is this administration. And I was thinking that this morning. How do we know who to trust here? What information do we know to trust right now in this moment when we're all watching, when this affects us all globally, when our allies are being threatened now? And, this idea that, I just read that the president's being briefed on multiple site options that serve as dual use options, so that are both military and civilian sites, so they can try to deny any culpability there. But those images are pretty clear. And these are the kinds of images that my grandkids will be seeing in history books.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I have to say, this was the biggest warning a lot of us that came forward from the first Trump administration were concerned about, is that in moments of national security consequence on very serious issues of life and death, Donald Trump was unpredictable. He was untied to values. He was untied to the law. And anyone who thinks I'm just saying that because I'm a disgruntled employee need only look at what Donald Trump said a few weeks ago. He made very clear that his worldview is nothing can stop him, not the law, not morality, only, in his words, his own conscience. People, 4-star Marine generals who served around him in the first term, were terrified by the way he was handling issues that can affect your life and death, Americans, your actual future, your prosperity, your safety. They saw a man, I saw a man, we saw a man that sat there and considered things impulsively and flippantly and recklessly, like a drunk behind the wheel of a car, except it's an entire nation. And he's got his finger on the nuclear button. I mean, I saw this with North Korea, Maritza, where he, during the tit for tat with North Korea early in Trump's term, he had no sense of strategy. He was tweeting us to a place that military commanders worried he was going to accidentally get us into a nuclear war. I don't care if you're a pro-Trump tech bro who loves his memes. You got to love your country and your survival of your friends and family enough to say, it is pretty reckless for the president to tweet us into a possible nuclear war that we can't get out of once it starts. That seems pretty damn reckless. And we had to do planning at the Department of Homeland Security to prepare for the possibility that some of you might get slaughtered in a nuclear holocaust. I don't take any joy in remembering those days sitting around a table saying, we don't know if the president's going to get us into this circumstance, but it's bad enough that we've got to start planning for what we do if the bombs start dropping on America. That's scary as hell. And a lot of us thought that by warning that publicly, maybe we would avoid Donald Trump getting into that kind of circumstance. Now, here we are. We're in a war with Iran. We've got the president of the United States openly threatening genocide to wipe out a whole civilian population, doubling down on the rhetoric, a historic number of members of Congress calling for his removal from office. This is it. This is the big one. This is a very scary moment. And yet, incredibly, Maritza, we still have folks that are on the GOP side, MAGA Republicans completely silent. Republican leaders, last I checked before we came on the air, still silent about this today.
I think the silence is very loud, Miles, because we're not seeing a bunch of people coming out and saying, oh, well, this and this and this. I did see that Senator Ron Johnson said he's hoping and praying this is just bluster. And it's like, okay, but then I did see one representative, Congressman Nathaniel Moran. He posted this on Twitter just a few hours ago and said, basically, yeah, we need to be prepared to use overwhelming military force. But then later on said, let me be clear, I do not support the destruction of a whole civilization. That is not who we are, and it is not consistent with the principles that have long guided America. That's the first post, anything like that, I've seen from a sitting Republican congressman today. Of course, we saw Marjorie Taylor Greene call for, his removal via the 25th Amendment this morning. But yeah, I mean, I was checking some of the usual defenders. They're silent. They're silent right now. How can you be silent in this moment? And it's just a shocking position that we are in.
Well, I think we have a clip of some of the coverage on some of those defectors, and I mentioned a number of the names this morning of the people in the MAGA coalition that have broken away from Donald Trump amidst this controversy. Let's roll that clip if we have it.
How do we 25th Amendment his ass?
The problem is to get the 25th Amendment's harder than impeachment. You have to get 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate.
So what do we do?
Tackle Trump and pretend, let him pretend he's president and publicly report that he's going through a health issue and Vance take over. It literally needs to be something like that. It's that bad.
It is vile on every level. It begins with a promise to use the U.S. military, our military, to destroy civilian infrastructure in another country, which is to say to commit a war crime, a moral crime against the people of the country. Those people who are in direct contact with the president need to say, no, I'll resign. I'll do whatever I can do legally to stop this because this is insane. And if given the order, I'm not carrying it out.
Seems like the president seems to be indicating that we'll be hitting civilian infrastructure. What do you make of that? Do you think that's becoming of a commander-in-chief?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And I'm a supporter. That's over and above. It shouldn't be by anybody, to tell you the truth, much less a president.
I mean, you add on to that, Maritza. We had Alex Jones there, Tucker Carlson. We've had Megyn Kelly coming out, and Joe Rogan, and Candace Owens, and just a whole host of different people from the MAGA coalition that got Donald Trump elected, saying that the man is deranged, completely distancing themselves from him. I have never seen that level of defection from loyalists around Donald Trump. Certainly there were the folks like me and others who went into the first administration that didn't know the man well personally until they came into office. But most of us weren't ideological MAGA. We were sort of old school Bush Republicans. This is his core radicalized base, or a lot of them, that have broken away in recent hours, days, or weeks.
Yeah, these are the people who really got him elected, Miles. I mean, these are the people who spoke to their audiences in this kind of new media space and really got people who'd never voted before to come out and support Donald Trump. I mean, when you put InfoWars on the screen, InfoWars talking about the 25th Amendment, that is so telling. So I think that we are going to continue to see these fractures, right? And I've joked about this before, but it feels like this Mean Girls moment. Like you go after the circle. You go after the circle and the Gretchen Wieners of the administration and MAGA, and that's how you break through. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really telling when we see InfoWars and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly and yada, yada, yada down the line saying these things. And, meanwhile, again, I don't think that people, we talk about this all the time. I don't think people quite understand, okay, well, what does that mean for us here? You talk about the ability to hack into our utilities, to our water system. Like, I don't think people really understand what that could look like. Cyber attacks and cyber warfare. And that is something that John Tester talks about all the time. I mean, he thinks that's one of our largest threats. So I think we need to be a little bit clearer about what's at stake here and what this could look like if and when Iran decides to retaliate against us, and what that looks like here on the ground.
Well, we have with us today, Maritza, one of the nation's leading scholars of authoritarianism. Dr. Stephen Fish is a professor of political science at the University of California, Berkeley, and a leading authority on democratic resilience and the fight against autocracy and authoritarianism in the United States and beyond. Dr. Fish, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you for joining on a dark day, as it were, but one very much in your wheelhouse.
My pleasure, Miles. Glad to join you.
I want to ask you up front. I mean, we had former Deputy Director of National Intelligence Sue Gordon on just before you, who mentioned that there was the old saying that you never knew what the Chinese were going to do because you needed to know what President Xi was going to do, and that's because it's a command economy, it's an autocracy, it's a system that Xi himself fully and completely controls through the threat of retaliation and violence and full control over all elements of national power. And now in the United States, we are talking about no one in the US government, including at the highest levels of the military, seeming to know what the president is going to do next. It seems like today, there's almost no better data point that we've had in Trump's 2 terms than that level of uncertainty indicating that we are in something that is not described as democratic with a small d by any means. What's your reaction to everything that we've seen over the past 48 hours?
Absolutely, Miles. And I think Maritza brought up a crucial point before. I think she said that Senator Ron Johnson was hoping and praying that this was just a bluff. Well, he's not a member of the United States Senate. I mean, these members of Congress could be giving thunderous speeches on the floor, refusing to move the president's legislation anywhere until he stops this disastrous campaign. And they're not doing anything. See, what a democracy is supposed to get you is checks on an imperious president, somebody like Trump. Well, if the Republicans in Congress won't stand up, if the Supreme Court, generally speaking, as a habit, doesn't stand up to the president, and if the people are not out in the streets by the millions, this is the right we have in a democracy to assemble like this, then you can get an authoritarian system-like situation where you've got this completely out of control president, acting the way he is. And I would note that, some of the pathological consequences of this war include turning this regime, which was widely despised among the people. I don't think 1 in 3 Iranians actually wanted this regime to survive just a few months ago, into a kind of national hero, this totalitarian regime, which Iranians generally hate. And now they're the only hope for holding the country together. Because the Israelis and apparently the Americans don't want a democracy in Iran. They want a failed state. They want to arm the Baluchs and the Kurds and other groups in order to basically render Iran Syria or Lebanon. They want a failed state. What's more, this totalitarian regime gets left in place. The United States, as you guys know, under Trump has moved America from being the leader of the free world, the custodian of these force multiplying alliances that are good for us, good for world peace. He's trading that in for junior partnership in Putin's autocracy international. And now he's acting like Putin. Now he's deciding, okay, now that that's where the position we occupy in the international system, we'll act like Putin does in Ukraine. We're going to bomb civilian sites. We're going to take out civilian infrastructure. This is a sad sight indeed. And when you think about the effect of this on American prestige in the world, it's mind-boggling.
Dr. Fish, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And then you think about the visual of the vice president, J.D. Vance, in Hungary, stumping for Orban at this moment in time. I mean, what do you make of this? Like, I know it's hard to kind of decode what's in the president's mind at any given time, but what's the point of putting out that threat this morning the way he did? I mean, is there any scenario that you can see that gets us anywhere closer to a decent end here?
I don't think so. This is just a kind of extra pathological extension of Trump's normal way of negotiating. We'll put negotiate in quotes here, which is you ask for $1 million, hoping to get 100. But the problem here is he's not just asking for, it's not a diplomatic ask. He's saying that you better do this thing that I want, or I'm going to, completely level your entire country. So the combination of kind of an extreme demand backed by this big threat, in hopes that he gets, something much less than what he's actually asking for, has a certain negotiating logic in certain realms. But when you're saying, if you don't do what I want right now, I'm going to blow up your entire country, that's an entirely different and even more pathological kind of extension of his negotiating mentality. And again, the effect of this on our prestige in the world, the effect of this on, our foreign policy credibility in the world, is beyond devastating.
I want to ask you, Dr. Fish, about some of the different scenarios that could or should play out in a moment like this. It is evident that the president of the United States is unhinged. He is threatening war crimes. The threat of war crimes is itself something that is criminal. The threat of genocide is criminal. The threat of genocide cuts against the Geneva Conventions. And so you would think something like the 25th Amendment to the Constitution might be invoked, Section 4, allowing for the temporary removal of the president by his cabinet. But, I think a lot of folks don't have confidence in this group of loyalists in the president's cabinet to do anything to check him in a moment like this. But I suggested something else this morning in a piece. And while it may be very unlikely, seems to me one of the things that might be plausible in a moment like this, which is that it would take right now only 3 House Republicans to flip control of the chamber, or to threaten Donald Trump with impeachment, or to hold him accountable on an Iran war vote. That's it. 3 Republicans. And there are currently 39 retiring Republicans in the House, which is a huge number, one of the biggest retiring classes we've ever seen. And a lot of them aren't running for another office. They're just full on retiring from public life. So you have sort of a fertile group of people that might be culled for doing something semi-courageous politically. And, some of them who've stood up to Donald Trump before. What do you make of that? And by the way, these are some of the closest margins we have seen in the U.S. House in 100 years. It's been since the 1930s that control of the House was this close. It would seem that there's a historic opportunity for a sober-minded person on the Republican side of the aisle to say, you know what, I need to caucus with the Democrats here to hold this madman accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I do think, though, even budging 3 Republicans on anything these days, maybe you can budge 1 or 2. Getting all the way up to 3 or 4 is very hard. I mean, even with these retiring Republicans. I also think a lot of members of Congress question whether they could do anything about it. Okay, so let's say they pass a resolution condemning this war. What reason do they have to think that Trump is going to cease what he's doing? He doesn't care about the Constitution. He doesn't need officially a war powers resolution from Congress. He's not declaring war. So I think a lot of them probably think, well, what would the good of this actually be? Let me say something also about the 25th Amendment. I obviously it's justifiable right now, but as you pointed out, he's got a cabinet not of serious-minded people who are going to tell him the truth about things, but just sycophants, just bootlickers who he surrounded himself with. I think many people also wonder about the 25th Amendment because guess what happens if Trump leaves office? We get J.D. Vance, and I'm not convinced that J.D. Vance, even on this war, would be any better than Trump. I'm not really sure he would be doing things differently than Trump. The man who is, as Marissa just pointed out, is headed to Budapest, to endorse, the Putin's Trojan horse in the EU. And, the Republicans love Orban. He's this dictator of Hungary or leader of Hungary because, he's got this model of what the Republicans want to do here, which is to eliminate democracy, but hold these sham elections that kind of make it look like we've got a democracy. So again, I'm not really sure that Vance would do much better. Vance is off to Hungary. He's meeting with Orban to try to buck him up before this election when he's running against somebody who really would restore the kind of Hungary that might be a democracy, a full-blown democracy again. I think the whole situation, given the Republicans' sycophancy to Trump, including in Congress, given the fact that our VP is J.D. Vance, makes for a very different situation than we would normally expect to face under these circumstances.
I don't feel optimistic, but I want to ask you, Dr. Fish, to anchor us in history here. Look, Abraham Lincoln, withdrew habeas corpus, suspended habeas corpus. FDR took an entire race of people and sent them into internment camps in the United States. We've seen extraordinary violations of civil rights and civil liberties in this country. Where does Donald Trump fit on that spectrum? How should people in the arc of history contextualize what is happening under his second administration?
He's far, far worse than any previous president. Look, the internment of Japanese Americans was, we know, looking back, inexcusable. I think at the time, given circumstances and kind of how far the America had not developed in terms of our thinking about some of these things, not saying it was excusable, but it wasn't an intentional attack on a group of people for the sake of attacking them. Lincoln sends habeas corpus. Look, we were in a civil war, right? I mean, and it was pretty much good guys versus bad guys. Again, you know, you can criticize these actions, but what Trump is trying to do is something that neither of the previous presidents you mentioned was doing, which is to suspend rights for the sake of establishing an authoritarian regime. This isn't for fighting the Civil War. This isn't for fighting World War II. He's doing this for the sake of making sure that he and his cronies and his party stay in power forever. His entire second term has been about moving the United States from liberal democracy status to what political scientists call electoral authoritarianism. Elections are kind of set in advance. You've got all kinds of rigging in the system that enables him to not lose. So I think, and when you look at ICE isn't, you know, Democrats oftentimes just snipe at ICE's violations, but there's a bigger picture here. Trump is trying to get us used to the sight of troops in the streets. You know, this is what he's going to have to do to put down demonstrations or control elections, stationing these people, as he's basically said he's going to do, in election places. This is all an effort. Trump's whole second administration is an effort to basically establish an authoritarian regime in the United States. And I think, you know, the Epstein files and even this war and other things, in many ways, are kind of a distraction that he throws these distractions out at us, while this whole machine of trying to implement authoritarianism in America kind of rolls on. And I think we have to keep our minds and our focus on that big picture, as well as these other issues. Trump is a master of using distraction, of saying outrageous things in order to distract us from what he's really doing, which is trying to bring democracy to an end for his own sake and that of his cronies.
So, Dr. Fish, what's the lesson there for us who, you know, for people who have fought back against this successfully, for people who might be ardent followers of the president and don't really understand this? What would you say to them as an expert on authoritarianism? How do we get past this hurdle right now?
Well, look, everything, Maritza, it depends on the Democratic Party's performance in elections. You know, I grew up in a Republican family. It didn't used to be like this, you know, small government, responsible government, small business. You know, that's not what we're in today. The Republican Party's been completely hijacked by this guy who is absolutely hostile to democracy. So the Democrats, and I have my quibble with my own party, my quibbles with the party, have to win every election for the foreseeable future. That's the only way to safeguard democracy in the United States. And I've written a book called Comeback that actually talks about how the Democrats can get their act together. And I'm afraid, as I look at what's going on leading up to the midterms right now, that the Democrats are making a lot of their same mistakes. All they do is talk about affordability these days. That's kind of the issue of the month. They look at issue polls and then they tell people what those polls seem to think that people want to hear, rather than stepping out and establishing a reputation for what matters in American elections. I have a lot of data to this end, which is a party's perception of strength, a candidate's perception of temerity and strength and ability to follow through and make his or her program law. And I think that, you know, it's very important for Democrats now to recognize we have to establish a sense of party. We have to beat these Republicans in these elections, and everything depends on that, really. I mean, that's what it all comes down to right now. And everything else, I think, is details.
Well, Dr. Stephen Fish of UC Berkeley, I will say that your thesis was validated this morning with the somewhat tepid responses from the House Minority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader, both of whom have put out responses to this moment that a lot of their own party members have said did not meet the moment. So, Dr. Fish, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for shedding light on where we are at as a country. We'd love to have you back.
My pleasure, Miles.
Thanks. Maritza, I think this would be a good moment in the program for us to say, if you are not currently a subscriber to or following the Grounded podcast that Maritza hosts with Senator John Tester, you should subscribe to her, follow the podcast. If you are not a member of defiance.org, go to that domain. You can sign up for free updates on what's happening in our democracy. And if you want to join as part of the club, you can contribute every single month to actions that we take every week to protect democracy and the rule of law. 100% of what people give to defiance.org goes to our efforts to protect democracy. So go check that out. Maritza, we'll end on maybe a somewhat hopeful note today before we take a few questions, which every day we end the program with a segment called Who is Joining the Defiance? And I want to get your reaction to this one, Maritza, because tonight, the person who is joining the Defiance in the United States is Asghar Farhadi. He's a two-time Academy Award-winning Iranian filmmaker, best known for films like A Separation and The Salesman, and a massive respected voice in global cinema. And now he's using his platform to speak out as the war escalates, stating, quote, "I call on artists and filmmakers everywhere in the world to be a voice in these critical days and hours in any way possible to stop the destructive aggression that has increasingly destroyed civilian infrastructure that belongs to the Iranian people and is related to the basic needs of their daily survival. The destruction of infrastructure is not just the destruction of buildings, it's an attack on human life and dignity. Attacking a country's infrastructure is a war crime. Regardless of any beliefs or attitudes, let's unite to stop this inhumane, illegal, and destructive process." You know, I find it really interesting, Maritza, that we have seen so many Iranians who fled their country, who hate the regime, who want the regime replaced, being among the first to say that this administration is doing it wrong. I mean, they're happy to see an effort to try to dislodge this regime, but then horrified that we have a president who has, as recently as this morning, threatened to lay waste to the population itself.
Yeah, I think that there's so many things here, Miles. You know, for one, with so many news stories, we can hold multiple truths at once. The Iranian regime was awful, and this is also awful, threatening to obliterate this civilization. I happen to be in Hawaii. My very best friend from childhood, since we were 4 years old, lives here. Her father-in-law is from Iran, and he left before the revolution. But he has a lot of family and friends still there because they couldn't, you know, not everybody has the means to get out, to move. I mean, we are all just by sheer dumb luck born where we are born. And I always think about that in these moments. We need to think about that when we talk, whether it's Iran, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Israel, whether it's the United States. People are not their governments. And just like 100% of people in the United States are not on board with President Trump, 100% of the people in Russia are not on board with Vladimir Putin, and same in Iran. And yes, there are loyalists, but my goodness, we have so many civilians. And I just think it's so important to keep that in mind here. I mean, these are humans. And when we talk about being pro-life and the sanctity of life, I just think as a mother of, you know, what it must be like right now to be holding a baby in Iran, wondering what is coming down tonight. And the White House just posted something since we've been on, Miles, on their Facebook page. Someone just sent it to me. Iran's decades of terrorism won't continue under President Trump. The 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. I mean, they're doubling down. And so I think as we all look ahead for tonight and what this means in Iran, what this means here in the United States, I mean, it's just a really sad moment, and it is scary. And I don't know what comes next, but I know that my co-host, Senator John Tester, would be screaming, and he already has today, about Article 1 of the Constitution and where the hell is Congress? I know that's what he's saying right now.
And seemingly asleep at the wheel if they're on the Republican side. I mean, we've heard mostly crickets. I mean, you mentioned one member of Congress earlier, Maritza, who on the Republican side had spoken out, but it was also a lengthy post. It was caveat over caveat. And I got to say, I mean, I spent a number of years working on the Iranian threat, working to thwart Iranian terrorist attacks from the regime. I got no love lost for this regime. This is a horrific, brutal, repressive regime. But you heard our guests earlier today saying, sort of ironically, in going after the Iranian people, they have radicalized the people back into support of the horrific regime that we were trying to put pressure on. That's the opposite of the goal that the Trump administration stated it wanted to achieve, is to help free the Iranian people. Well, now they've convinced the Iranian people that the bad guy is not the regime that's been oppressing them for decades, that it's the United States. And you know what? I got to say something. The Iranian people who feel that way, there's some validity. We became the bad guys today, which is a huge insult to all the years so many of us put into public service, grinding our asses off, getting low pay, working crazy hours to try to protect this country, only to have this president go insult all of those efforts of millions of people across generations by defying our basic values. That is insulting to me. Members of the military should be insulted. Retired public servants should be insulted. This is not what we all worked so hard for, is to become the bad guys before our eyes. And make no mistake, threatening to go kill civilians to get what you want makes you the bad guy. I stand by that through and through. We became the bad guys today. That's fucked up. That's not okay.
Well, and we talked earlier about the social media posts. I mean, in an age where all of our kids, we have to have these talks with our kids about social media and what you post online, and that words matter and you can't take things back. Meanwhile, we have the leader of the free world putting out online whatever thought pops up into his head without any guidance, without any consulting of the national security experts or his advisors. And you talk about like what radicalized you, right? That's the big question and the big joke when people ask about people on the left. But my gosh, what lessons have we learned from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from terror groups that rise up because of our involvement in these things? What cell is going to be formed because the United States bombed a children's school in Iran, a girls' school? I mean, this is how you turn countries against us. And then you mentioned the fact that our allies are getting pulled into this. Our allies are getting threatened right now. We've alienated our allies. We have totally obliterated USAID. Tariffs. There's so much to talk about here. Our standing in the world. My dad lives in Greece. I mean, I hear all the time people over there saying, what are they doing? What is happening? So I think there's a lot to think about there.
Well, if people are looking for any sort of silver lining today, let me say it is this. Donald Trump is further isolating himself within the Republican Party, within the MAGA movement, within the American political system, and on the world stage. Why does that matter? Because each of those layers was, at various points, an enabler of something autocratic Donald Trump wanted to do. His hardcore MAGA followers putting legitimacy on his efforts to bring revenge against political opponents, a political system that didn't want Donald Trump's usurpation of power, international allies who were scared to confront the United States over Donald Trump's actions across borders that were obviously illegal. Those circles of support are closing. It will be harder for Donald Trump after this to do things that he wants to do. We're not just going to snap back to normal. America's allies are running scared right now. Members of Congress, I'm texting with some of those retiring Republican members of Congress. I make no mistake, I sent them that article I wrote today. I said, will you step up and do something? I'm trying to persuade some of those people to show a little bit more courage actively. As we speak, I have some of those messages popping up on my phone, but those circles of support are closing after this. He's going to have a harder time. Now, that's good and bad because Donald Trump is getting backed into more of a corner. He's backing himself into a corner, which means he'll probably lash out more, but he's going to have a harder time doing that with allies after this. To me, there was a watershed moment today, but the thing that I worry about, assuming that we don't get pulled into a deeper, darker catastrophe with Iran, which is a big assumption because we're not out of the woods by any means. Tonight at 8 p.m., something horrible could happen. The president's threatening horrible things. We also have to worry about what this means for our elections, Maritza. And I think people in the comments I'm seeing are very concerned about if Donald Trump is bringing this autocratic energy to our elections, we should be very concerned. And tomorrow, for our weekly mission brief, we're going to be focused on how amidst this do we double down on efforts to protect our elections. And I want to get your take on that, Maritza. I mean, because this goes beyond Iran. We are seeing a Donald Trump who is visibly, observably, mentally unhinged. And we've got to worry about other things he could do with his power.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to worry about, especially when we see him do things that look so much like what Vladimir Putin does. And we know how those elections look in Russia. We know how the elections look in Venezuela. We know that there are examples of this elsewhere in the world, and we should take notice. I am so torn on this, Miles, because I've talked to so many people and experts who say, listen, these elections are going to hold. They're run by the states. They can't do this. And when there's talk about nationalizing the election, there's no way that's going to happen. But then you know, the Save America Act is a concern. Sending ICE or other federal agents, which is illegal, to the polls, that's a concern, even to intimidate certain people from coming out, taking people off voter rolls. So there's a lot to talk about there. And I know right now that in certain states, especially, there are election officials really, they're taking this very seriously. And they say that this will not be something that we need to worry about. But I hope they're right.
Well, let's take a couple of questions from Defiance.org members in the chat. Deborah Piper asks, will our soldiers refuse to go through with this illegal order? I think that's the big thing that we're going to be watching tonight, Maritza, is whether or not Donald Trump follows through on these threats to go attack civilian infrastructure. As you noted, there's reporting that they're looking at what's called dual use targets, which is targets that they could credibly say, well, you know, this is a power facility that supplies power to an IRGC base and also perhaps a local community. And, you know, the balance of striking it is that it's going to have more military impact than detrimental impact to civilians. But now the president is putting his own military into the position of having every targeting decision parsed by people. I mean, that's a terrifying position to be in if you're in the United States military in the chain of command. Oh my gosh, every decision I am making right now is going to be under a microscope. And I wonder, after hearing from our guests today, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling and Sue Gordon and Steve Fisher, do you think we're going to see some of those potential defections from the military and pushback up the chain of command?
I think we're going to see some people push back. I do. I mean, we've already seen it, Miles, in some circumstances. I read an article this morning about the Army Secretary Dan Driscoll being at odds with Secretary Pete Hegseth. So I think there's already some dissent and division there. But I think what is actually something that I've been ruminating on is that we have members of Congress who stand by, and as I'll use Tester's phrase here, he says they wrap themselves in the flag and they say, support our troops. And they are silent right now. They are silent right now. And they are going to let our troops be the ones to make that decision when they could be standing up together, joining together and pushing back so that our troops don't have to make that split-second decision when they might get an order that they think is unlawful or illegal or a war crime, for goodness sakes. I mean, I think that our members of Congress need to show as much bravery as our troops show every single day. But I think we will see a mixed bag. But I can't imagine what it must be like. I can't imagine what it must be like to wonder and wait for that order to come and maybe go against everybody you're around to say, no, that's not okay. And then what? What happens after that?
Well, you know, one of the folks writing in the chat, Maritza Twinkle, says, question, can we talk about the U.S. Marshal's Office and why aren't they arresting Donald Trump? You know, I think this is a sentiment a lot of people feel right now. Isn't this the scenario that in, you know, political science classes or war games that or in fictional movies that we were supposed to be prepared for? What if a president of the United States broadcasts that he is preparing illegal activity, but not just any illegal activity? Trump, if taken at his word, is pledging the mass slaughter
Genocide.
of civilians. That you can't, someone posted earlier, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. We haven't stopped talking about it. There are 90 million people in Iran. The White House has, according to officials, not taken the use of nuclear weapons off the table. This is a really serious conversation, folks. Now, the immediate answer to you, Twinkle, is the U.S. Marshal Service reports up through the Attorney General to the President. No, we're not going to expect the U.S. Marshal Service to do anything independent to go arrest the President of the United States. But that's not how the system works, because if this is really what is happening, if the President is planning to undertake obviously illegal activity, it's incumbent upon his cabinet to hold him accountable and to prevent the law from being broken. It's incumbent upon his attorney general to have him investigated by the FBI. It's incumbent on members of Congress to open impeachment proceedings and to deprive him of the funds to carry out lawless actions in a war. There are constitutional mechanisms that should be used. But my criticism here is not just reserved for the Republicans who aren't showing any spine. It's reserved for the Democratic leaders who, in response to this today, have said, this guy's a madman. Something needs to be done. Or people on the president's side of the aisle who say hopes and prayers that this is not what he means. We don't need hopes and prayers. We don't need PR. We don't need press release and tweets. We need you to do your goddamn jobs and fulfill your constitutional duties. That's what is happening right now. And people need to wake up for that. So I know it's very unsatisfying when we say, talk to members of Congress. Call members of Congress. They need to hear from you. If ever there was a day in my life that I told another single person to pick up the phone and call their member of Congress, it's today. It is today. This is the type of thing that they need to know their constituents are terrified by. Now, do I think that the United States is going to fall into a nuclear conflict tomorrow? I want to assure people watching, I don't think that's going to happen. But that there's any hesitation in my voice, or Sue Gordon's voice, who ran the spy community under Donald Trump, or Lieutenant Hertling earlier, who oversaw U.S. forces in Europe, that hesitation should give you pause about the seriousness of the moment, about the gravity of what is happening. Now, I hope tonight at 8 p.m. Donald Trump does his taco thing and says, I've moved the deadline again, and this is not what I'm going to do, and we've reached some sort of deal. I hope for that. But that he has gotten us to this point of people questioning whether he could be pushing the dominoes into some sort of nuclear conflict should have everyone in this country up in arms. And I hope we see a little more courage from his side of the aisle. And I am, Maritza, at least heartened that we are seeing a lot of in the MAGA coalition out there saying, no more. This guy, we're done with this guy. That is still a pretty big deal.
I think it's a huge deal. And I know people say, yeah, but they got him here. And I get that. I totally get that. But there has to be movement or start of movement somewhere. And that's the start of movement. So I don't know. And I don't know, we were talking about this before the show with Sue and the general. What does this look like at 8 p.m. Eastern? I mean, CNN basically at the top of every hour is saying, okay, we have 4 hours left, 3 hours left. What does this look like? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen at 8 p.m. And the general said, well, it feels like some sick reality show. And it does. It does. And I just hope that everyone realizes here, like this, we all live here together. We are all on this earth together. What are we doing? I hope cooler minds prevail here.
Well, as we close the program today, I will say to folks, you also have agency beyond just picking up the phone and calling your member of Congress. And that's why I want people to join us tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Eastern. Every Wednesday, we do a special episode of Defiance Daily called the Weekly Mission Brief, where we take an actual action to go counter the abuses of power we are seeing in Washington. And tomorrow, we will be focused on that most important action you could possibly take amidst all of this, which is protecting your democratic right to vote and the rights of other people. Tomorrow, we will announce direct support to one of the organizations that is suing the Trump administration over an obviously unconstitutional executive order to deprive you of your right to vote unfettered via mail-in ballot. That organization is also doing work to safeguard our elections and preparing to take this administration to court as the president potentially attempts to take over America's election infrastructure. That is tomorrow. It is very important that you join us. You can do things in this moment. Follow the folks over at Grounded, Maritza and the incredible John Tester. Sign up for defiance.org. We are doing this for the sole purpose of protecting this country. I get on this thing every day with you. Maritza does. Xander, my co-founder, does, because we are worried about the direction this country is headed. But we're more than worried. We want to give you options to do something about it and to defy it. And that's where you have agency. You can do something about all of this. You can go to a No Kings protest, but it doesn't have to be once or twice a year that you do something. Every single week, we're going to give you an opportunity to do something to hold this administration accountable and to make sure that the rule of law survives this moment in time. So I hope you'll join us tomorrow night. Maritza, as always, I'm so grateful that you are guest hosting with me this week. It's been so much more fun than doing it with Xander Schultz, who everyone in our community despises. I think Xander will come back and he'll find that his desk in the office has been torched. They can't stand him. No, really. We miss Xander. We hope he's having a wonderful celebration away from working this week. And we're grateful that you have joined us while you are down there, hopefully at the beach and enjoying yourself in the far, far west.
Well, I will be. But let me just say, Xander chose a hell of a week to take a vacation.
Yeah, he did. He's going to come back and hopefully he's just tuned out the news. He's going to come back and say, whoa, what happened to you guys? And,
and I was thinking yesterday, you said something like, how sad is it that Maritza's on vacation and joining us and Xander can't do that? And I'm like, no, actually, that's more of a reflection on how sad I am. Like he has boundaries in his life and he's trying to stay sane, which we all need to do. So find your way to stay sane today, everybody, and tell some people you love them. And we've got this. We're in this together, and we're going to keep being in this together.
Amen. And we'll be able to make some jokes by next week. Hopefully me and our producer will put together a supercut of all the things we've said about our friend Xander while he's gone, just so we can catch him up. Maritza, thank you again for being with me. And for the rest of y'all, please do join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Defiance Daily as we talk about what you can do to protect this country. And in the meantime, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. Thanks for joining us.